In the financial world, when a CEO's closest advisors start resigning in rapid succession, it signals something deeper than internal disagreement. That's exactly where we are right now with former President Donald Trump's inner circle. Unlike past political turbulence, this one targets the foundation of personal loyalty, the very currency Trump has built his entire career upon. You see, from an investor's perspective, this is less about family drama and more about structural collapse. Signals about how far leadership can fracture before losing all operational capacity. Structural instability doesn't always start with chaos. Sometimes it begins with quiet patterns we ignore for too long. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, because this matters to every single American, whether you follow politics closely or not. Before we dive deeper, if you appreciate this kind of measured analysis that cuts through the noise to show you what's really happening, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want to stay informed about the forces shaping our political and economic landscape, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. You see, understanding these patterns isn't just about politics, it's about reading the signals that affect all of us. In my 94 years, I've seen 14 recessions, countless political crises, and more leadership collapses than I care to count. As someone who has watched capital markets and observed boardrooms for over half a century, I can tell you this. Markets teach you that loyalty has a price, and when that price exceeds the perceived value, even the strongest alliances fracture. In business, we have a saying, when the cost of staying becomes higher than the cost of leaving, you'll see who was there for principle and who was there for profit. Capital doesn't lie, and neither do patterns of human behavior under stress. Now, I'm not here to scare you or push any particular political agenda. Let me be clear about something. From where I sit, what I care about is institutional stability, the preservation of systems that allow our economy and our democracy to function. And right now, those systems are being tested in ways that should concern anyone who cares about long-term American prosperity. What happened over the past 72 hours is particularly telling. You see, the conversation in Washington and in political circles across the country has shifted from speculation about Trump's political future to something far more immediate, something far more personal. Melania Trump released a statement that sent shockwaves through what remains of her husband's inner circle. New reports indicate that this wasn't just a wife defending her husband or standing by his side through controversy. This was something different. From a risk management view, the concern lies in the convergence of multiple fractures. Melania's public positioning on one side, key advisors distancing themselves on another, and longtime allies suddenly going silent. That convergence signals institutional fracture. In corporate terms, it's like a board discovering that the CEO's spouse is no longer defending the company's direction while simultaneously watching the executive team start updating their resumes. You see, you don't see that unless the core system is under real stress. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Sources close to the Trump organization and his political operation now report that high-ranking members of his team, people who have been with him since the beginning of his political career, are quietly exploring exit strategies. These are not low-level staffers or recent hires. We're talking about individuals who have defended Trump through 2 impeachments, multiple investigations, and countless controversies. You see, as someone who has observed leadership transitions in boardrooms for over half a century, I can tell you this. When insiders who have everything to lose by leaving start preparing departure plans anyway, the issue is no longer about weathering a storm. It's about survival. And that conversation only happens when staying aboard feels more dangerous than jumping ship. What's unfolding is historically significant. You see, we're witnessing the potential dissolution of one of the most tightly controlled political operations in modern American history. That's not noise. That's a structural earthquake. It shows that confidence isn't just eroding among political opponents or the general public. it's breaking down within the family unit and the trusted advisor network. You see, in markets, when stakeholders at every level start hedging against the same entity, it's not volatility, it's the beginning of insolvency. That distinction matters because it shifts the question from whether Trump can maintain political influence to whether he can maintain any organized operation at all. This moment is without precedent, not because political allies have abandoned leaders before, but because the combination of family distancing and organizational collapse is happening simultaneously. For a political figure whose entire brand has been built on strength, loyalty, and an unshakable inner circle, to see that circle fracture so visibly represents more than personal crisis. It's a sign that the fundamental value proposition, the reason people stayed loyal in the first place, has fundamentally changed. When seasoned political operatives who built their careers on Trump loyalty suddenly start questioning whether that loyalty serves them anymore, that's not drama. You see, that's a structural concern. You can't run a political movement or a business empire when internal alignment disappears. The breakdown always begins behind closed doors. And what we're seeing now are the first public glimpses of what's been happening in private for some time. Amid all the noise, one thing becomes clear to me. It's increasingly difficult to rely on surface-level reporting about what's really happening inside Trump's world. You see, in business, we don't act on headlines. We look at fundamentals, incentives, and behaviors. The same applies here. What matters is not just what people are saying publicly, but who is saying it, why they're saying it now, and how it aligns with observable patterns of self-interest and self-preservation. As I've learned over decades of observation, we are witnessing signals, not speculation. Smart decision makers will learn to separate the two. So let's return to the substance here, because this is important. You see, Melania Trump's statement doesn't recycle old talking points about standing by her husband or dismissing criticism as politically motivated attacks. This isn't the standard spouse defense we've seen countless times before. According to multiple credible sources, the statement addresses specific concerns about the direction of Trump's current activities and the impact those activities are having on their family, their reputation, and their future. That distinction is critical because when new positioning is being established by someone so close to the center of power, the implications matter. You see, markets, political or financial, respond most sharply not to chaos, but to uncertainty about where true allegiances lie. That's where we are now. In the past 72 hours, we've seen a dramatic shift, not only in tone, but in the nature of what's being communicated from within Trump's immediate family. You see, some sources are now describing Melania's position as one of protective distance. These are not vague characterizations. The phrase being used in Washington circles is strategic separation. From a legal standpoint, such positioning is significant. From an investor's perspective, it signals that those closest to Trump believe there may be liability exposure worth protecting against. When family members begin creating legal and public distance from someone who has always demanded absolute loyalty, we are no longer discussing temporary disagreements. You see, we are measuring the integrity of the entire operation itself. Alongside that is a second development that compounds the concern. This isn't about a singular disagreement over strategy or messaging. Multiple longtime advisors, people who have been in Trump's orbit for 5, 10, even 15 years, are reportedly communicating to colleagues that they're considering stepping back. That kind of coordinated hesitation, if confirmed, creates a ripple effect far beyond personnel changes. You see, in any institution, be it a corporation or a political organization, when the people who know the operation best start signaling they want out, trust decays rapidly. And when trust goes, so does operational capacity. Now, legal scholars and political analysts have flagged two specific incidents that escalated these concerns and appear to have triggered both Melania's statement and the advisor exodus. Let me walk you through them because they are important to understand. You see, the first occurred in mid-October when Trump, during a private gathering with major donors, allegedly made comments about his willingness to use federal power in ways that alarmed even his most loyal supporters. Regardless of one's political view, there are understood boundaries around how political figures discuss the use of government authority. Those boundaries exist for legal and ethical reasons. You see, none of those considerations appeared to be present in Trump's remarks, according to those who were in the room. The concern is not just about what was said, but about the pattern it represents. Repeated statements that push beyond legal norms set a precedent. And in both markets and politics, bad precedent becomes a cost nobody sees until it's too late. You see, there's a well-established understanding in political operations about separating campaign rhetoric from actual governance discussions, especially when it comes to law enforcement and federal agencies. It requires discipline, legal review, and institutional restraint. But in this case, according to 3 separate sources who attended the donor event, Trump bypassed all of those guardrails and spoke with a level of specificity that crossed from theoretical discussion into what sounded like operational planning. That alone raised eyebrows among people who have been defending him for years. However, what followed was even more concerning. You see, reports surfaced that Melania Trump, after learning about those comments through second-hand accounts, confronted her husband directly and expressed deep reservations about the legal exposure. Such statements could create, not just for him, but for their family and their financial interests. In any system, political or financial, when a spouse begins raising concerns about legal liability loudly enough that staff members become aware of it, we stop measuring political strategy and start questioning operational sustainability. To be clear, this isn't about typical marital disagreement or policy differences. You see, if the allegations hold, it means the person closest to Trump, someone who has remained largely silent through years of controversy, felt compelled to draw a line. Political observers are already calling this a serious fracture in what has always been Trump's most important relationship for image purposes. It's not just about one conversation, you see. It's about what happens when the protective instinct of a family member outweighs political loyalty. If that shift becomes permanent, rebuilding the unified front that Trump has always projected becomes exponentially harder. According to multiple sources, Melania's concerns were not limited to private conversations. She reportedly insisted that any future public statements from the Trump Organization include language that distances the family's business interests from Trump's political activities. The message was clear: protect the family brand first. You see, that demand may sound like reasonable asset protection, but it also resembles a recognition that the political and personal have become too intertwined, creating unacceptable risk. When family members start requiring legal separation between their interests and a leader's activities, it reflects not unity, but fragmentation. You see, in any boardroom, when a CEO's spouse starts demanding firewalls between family assets and company operations, it triggers immediate concerns about what the spouse knows that others don't. In politics, the stakes are even higher because the shareholders are voters, donors, and the public itself. An emergency meeting was reportedly convened at Mar-a-Lago after Melania's statement began circulating in draft form among Trump's legal team. You see, the purpose wasn't damage control for public consumption. It was about preventing a complete fracture of the leadership structure. As the statement moved toward potential release, senior advisors within Trump's political operation began holding private discussions not about defending Trump's position, but about protecting their own reputations and futures. You see, that indicates something deeper than disagreement. It suggests a recognition that the ship may be taking on water faster than it can be bailed out. Let me clarify what this kind of inner circle collapse really means, because it's important. You see, Political operations, especially ones built around a single personality like Trump's, depend entirely on the perception of strength and unity. It's the currency of influence. When cracks appear in that facade, the entire value proposition changes. Think of it as brand equity in corporate terms. Once consumer confidence in a brand erodes, it doesn't matter how good the product once was. The market moves on. You see, Trump's political brand has always been built on the idea that he's surrounded by loyal people, that his family stands united, and that his team is unshakable. If that narrative collapses, so does much of his leverage. After years of investigations, legal challenges, and political battles, this internal fracturing may represent something Trump has never faced before. Credible threats from outside can often strengthen internal loyalty. You see, it's the siege mentality that binds people together. Several of Trump's most difficult moments, the Russia investigation, the first impeachment, even the second one, seemed to intensify loyalty among his core team. But this is different. You see, this threat is coming from inside. When the fracture originates within the family unit and spreads to trusted advisors, there's no external enemy to rally against. The crisis is internal, and internal crises are far harder to spin. Now, the push to maintain unity within Trump's operation hasn't just emerged overnight. You see, it's been years in the making. Legal teams, political advisors, and family members have worked tirelessly to project an image of cohesion even during the most turbulent periods. But timing in matters of political survival, like in investment, is everything. Trump's circle has exercised strategic patience, weathering storms by staying unified publicly. You see, a fractured inner circle isn't just ineffective, it reshapes the entire power structure, often empowering the very forces it seeks to resist. History casts a long shadow here. Trump has survived scandals that would have ended other political careers, you see, and each time he emerged with his base intact, perhaps even strengthened. The pattern reinforced a perception among his supporters that he was invincible, that the attacks against him only proved his enemies feared him. That perception, once embedded, becomes a powerful asset, but perceived invincibility only holds as long as the closest allies continue projecting it. That's the tightrope Trump is walking now, risking the collapse of the very narrative that sustained him. That's why what's happening with Melania and the advisor exodus is so significant. For the first time, the cracks aren't coming from opponents. They're coming from the people who built the image of strength in the first place. You see, when the architects of your public persona start stepping back, the foundation itself becomes questionable. And foundations, once questioned, are very difficult to rebuild. In a political brand built entirely on personal loyalty, power doesn't exist in isolation. There are concentric circles of trust for a reason. You see, the innermost circle, family and longtime confidants, provides the stability that allows the outer circles to function. When the inner circle begins to fracture, it sends a signal through every layer of the operation. Advisors in the second and third circles start asking themselves a critical question. If the people closest to him are protecting themselves, why shouldn't I? In both markets and politics, that kind of self-preservation instinct spreads quickly. You see, once it takes hold, collective action becomes nearly impossible. These shifts in loyalty and alignment are not abstract. They have real operational consequences. When key advisors start distancing themselves, fundraising becomes harder. Donor confidence wavers. Media strategy loses coordination. Legal defenses become fragmented. You see, every function of a political operation depends on synchronized effort. If synchronization breaks down, the operation doesn't just slow down. It can collapse entirely. From my experience observing organizational dynamics over many decades, the warning signs are remarkably consistent, whether we're talking about a Fortune 500 company or a political movement. And right now, every warning sign is flashing. Now we shift to the parallel case involving longtime political advisors, and this is where things get even more troubling. You see, according to several independent sources, at least 3 senior advisors who have been with Trump since his first presidential campaign are now quietly meeting with legal counsel to discuss how to distance themselves from potential future liability. This isn't just a story about employment decisions, it's about self-preservation. Political advisors don't typically seek independent legal advice unless they perceive personal risk. You see, if that perception is widespread among people who know the operation intimately, it tells us something important about what they believe is coming. That shift is not a small matter. According to multiple independent reports, some advisors may be preparing to cooperate with ongoing investigations, not out of ideological opposition to Trump, but out of practical recognition that protecting him may no longer be compatible with protecting themselves. You see, in the corporate world, when senior executives start seeking separate counsel and considering cooperation with regulators, it triggers immediate crisis protocols. In politics, the implications are even greater. It raises the possibility that the protective wall Trump has always enjoyed from his inner circle may be developing cracks large enough for information to flow outward. You see, if these reports prove accurate, and I stress the word if, then we're no longer in the realm of political strategy. We're looking at a fundamental breakdown of operational security. When people who know where all the bodies are buried start considering whether to share that information, everything changes. You see, it transforms the risk calculation for everyone involved. In authoritarian-style operations, and let's be honest, Trump's political operation has always functioned more like a family business than a traditional political party. Loyalty is maintained through a combination of reward and fear. But when the fear of external consequences outweighs the fear of internal retaliation, the system breaks. Any erosion of that control invites cascading failure that cannot be easily reversed. In parallel with these concerns, another significant development made headlines. You see, a major donor network that has been instrumental in funding Trump's political activities reportedly held a conference call to discuss whether to continue their financial support. The call, which included some of the most influential conservative donors in the country, focused on what they described as reputational risk. In investment terms, this isn't just about politics. It's about brand association. You see, when major capital sources start questioning whether association with a political figure creates more liability than opportunity, that's a market signal. Decisions that ignore reputational cost tend to compound into broader financial consequences. Major donors have raised an important concern. They worry that continued association with Trump, especially given the internal turmoil now becoming public, could damage their own business interests and philanthropic reputations. You see, with Melania creating distance and key advisors heading for the exits, the perception of stability that made Trump attractive to major donors is evaporating. According to one political finance tracker, Trump's fundraising operation has seen a notable decline over the past 2 weeks. You see, that decline coincides almost exactly with the first rumors of Melania's statement and the advisor exodus. The correlation may not be causation, but in politics, as in markets, perception drives behavior. When donors sense instability, they hedge their bets. They diversify their political portfolios. They wait to see which way the wind blows. And in Trump's case, that wait-and-see approach represents a dramatic shift from the automatic support he once enjoyed. Some allegations circulating in political circles will sound familiar. You see, questions about legal exposure, investigations, and potential criminal liability have surrounded Trump for years. What's changed is the response from those closest to him. Previously, the standard approach was unified defense, attack the investigators, dismiss the allegations, and rally the base. But according to sources, that unified front is collapsing. Instead of coordinated messaging, there's fragmentation. Instead of aggressive defense, there's quiet distancing. You see, what sets this moment apart from previous crises isn't just the external pressure, it's the internal response. And the response we're seeing now suggests that even Trump's closest allies believe the cost of continued association may finally outweigh the benefits. It's no longer just partisan opponents or mainstream media raising concerns. You see, prominent Republicans, former Trump administration officials, and conservative commentators are beginning to speak more openly about what they describe as a leadership crisis. Their concern isn't about policy disagreements, it's about sustainability. When ideologically aligned voices start questioning viability, the conversation shifts fundamentally. You see, it moves from whether Trump can win political battles to whether Trump can maintain a functional operation at all. And that's a very different kind of crisis. The timeline of events over the past 2 weeks reveals an acceleration that cannot be ignored. You see, on October 28th, rumors first surfaced about tension between Donald and Melania Trump regarding legal strategy. By November 1st, those rumors had solidified into reports of direct confrontation. On November 4th, Melania's legal team began circulating a draft statement. By November 7th, senior advisors were reportedly holding private meetings about exit strategies. By November 10th, major donors convened their emergency conference call. And by November 13th, Melania's statement was finalized and prepared for release. You see, that's a 10-day compression of events that would normally unfold over months. When timelines compress like that, it indicates that the situation is moving faster than anyone can control. In markets, we call that momentum. In politics, it's often the beginning of collapse. According to credible reports, Melania Trump's statement addresses 3 specific areas of concern. First, it establishes that she and her family's business interests operate independently of Donald Trump's political activities. Second, it expresses concern about the legal strategies being employed by Trump's team and distances her from any decisions made without her input. Third, it makes clear that her priority is protecting their son, Barron, and preserving the family's long-term reputation and financial stability. You see, each of those points, taken individually, might seem like standard asset protection, but taken together, they constitute a fundamental repositioning. She's not standing beside him, she's standing apart. And in the world Trump has built, where loyalty is everything, standing apart is the same as standing against. Over the past 48 hours, the intensity of speculation about what this means for Trump's political future has clearly accelerated. But acting on that speculation carries enormous risk for those still in Trump's orbit. The political cost of leaving is substantial. You see, in today's Republican Party, which Trump still dominates in many ways, even legitimate decisions to step back can be branded as betrayal. Once that label sticks, it can end political careers, cut off fundraising networks, and turn former allies into permanent enemies. So the mere fact that senior advisors are weighing this option despite those costs tells us something critical. You see, they believe the risk of staying may now exceed the risk of leaving. The names aren't fully public yet, but based on credible reporting, the group of advisors considering departure includes former White House staff, current political consultants, and at least one person involved in Trump's legal defense. You see, if those individuals represent legal counsel, communications strategy, and political operations, then what we're seeing isn't just a few people getting nervous. It's a recognition across multiple functional areas that the operation itself may be unsustainable. That's the kind of breakdown that precedes organizational dissolution, not just reshuffling. This urgency is no coincidence. You see, the 2024 presidential primary season is accelerating, and Trump's position as frontrunner depends heavily on the perception that he remains the strongest, most viable candidate. Democrats and Republicans alike understand that once that perception cracks, momentum can shift rapidly. You see, if Trump's own inner circle visibly fractures during the primary season, it provides his opponents within the Republican Party with exactly the opening they need. It's a classic timing dilemma. The fracture is happening at the worst possible moment for Trump politically. In markets, we call that an exogenous shock hitting at maximum vulnerability. In politics, it's often the difference between survival and elimination. Momentum is rarely driven by one event. You see, it builds over time through repeated signals that create a narrative. In this case, Melania's statement and the advisor exodus are not isolated developments. They're part of a sequence. They follow months of legal setbacks, investigative revelations, and political challenges that have steadily increased pressure on everyone associated with Trump. You see, when individuals detect recurring stress points without any sign of relief or resolution, assessment shifts from caution to alarm. And when alarm becomes the dominant emotion among insiders, behavior changes rapidly. The more urgent question is whether Trump can stop the bleeding before the narrative of internal collapse becomes irreversible. What we're watching is a collision between personal loyalty and institutional self-preservation. You see, Trump has always demanded absolute loyalty and rewarded it with access, influence, and protection. But that social contract only works as long as Trump can deliver protection. If advisors believe he can no longer shield them from legal, financial, or reputational harm, the entire loyalty structure collapses. You see, loyalty built on transactional benefit evaporates the moment the transaction stops benefiting both parties, and we may be watching that evaporation happen in real time. If Melania's statement is released publicly, it will force a response from Trump. That response will tell us a great deal about his current state of mind and his strategic capacity. Does he attack her publicly, risking further family fracture and public sympathy turning against him? Does he ignore it, allowing the narrative of abandonment to solidify? Or does he try to minimize it, claiming it's been misunderstood or taken out of context? You see, none of those options are good. Each carries significant downside risk. The fact that Trump is facing a situation where there are no good moves available is itself a signal of how constrained his position has become. Here's where the calculation gets particularly complex. A public statement from Melania creates a documented record. It can be cited in legal proceedings. It can be used by investigators to establish distance between family assets and Trump's activities. It can be referenced by political opponents to argue that even his own wife doesn't support his approach. You see, in corporate terms, this is the equivalent of a board member publicly breaking with the CEO right before a shareholder vote. It doesn't just influence the immediate decision. It changes the perceived credibility of everything that follows. If this proceeds and Melania's statement becomes public while simultaneously senior advisors begin departing, Trump will face a crisis of legitimacy unlike anything he's experienced before. External attacks, he's proven he can survive. Internal defection is a different challenge entirely. You see, it raises the question that every political figure fears most. If the people who know you best won't stand with you, why should anyone else? That question, once planted, is extraordinarily difficult to uproot. Opinion doesn't shift overnight, especially not in polarized political environments. But it can reach a tipping point where the accumulation of signals creates irreversible momentum. We may be approaching that tipping point now. For Republicans who have defended Trump through countless controversies, Melania's distancing and advisor departures provide something they've never had before: permission to step back without being the first to do so. You see, in group dynamics, the first defector pays the highest price. But once a few high-profile figures make the move, it becomes safer for others to follow. That cascade effect can transform political landscapes very quickly. As for Trump's response strategy, That remains the critical unknown variable. Unlike traditional political crises, where advisors can coordinate messaging and legal teams can manage exposure, this crisis is happening within the team itself. You see, when the crisis is internal, there's no unified war room. There's fragmentation, competing interests, and ultimately, every person making their own calculation about self-preservation. That's the kind of environment where information leaks, stories get ahead of official responses, and narrative control becomes impossible. Trump built his political career on controlling the narrative, dominating media cycles, and outlasting critics through sheer force of personality and message discipline. But message discipline requires a disciplined team. You see, if that team is fracturing, the tools that made Trump successful become unavailable precisely when he needs them most. It's a compounding problem. The fracture makes crisis management harder, which accelerates the fracture, which makes management even harder. That's not a sustainable cycle. If Melania's statement does address legal liability concerns explicitly, it will signal to investigators and prosecutors that there may be internal recognition of exposure worth protecting against. You see, in legal terms, family members creating distance is often interpreted as consciousness of guilt or, at minimum, consciousness of risk. That interpretation, fair or not, influences how aggressively authorities pursue investigations. It suggests that even those closest to the subject believe there's something worth investigating, and that belief, once established, is very hard to overcome. Theoretically, Trump could attempt to frame this as Melania simply protecting family interests in a responsible way, separating business from politics as any prudent person would. You see, that narrative has some logic to it, but it only works if Trump can maintain the larger narrative of strength and control. If the story becomes Melania distancing herself because she's concerned about her husband's judgment or legal exposure, then the framing fails. And right now, with advisor exodus happening simultaneously, the latter narrative is far more compelling to most observers. Here's the deeper risk, and this is important to understand. You see, if this pattern of internal defection is ever normalized, if it becomes standard for political figures to see their inner circles fracture under pressure, it sets a precedent that changes American politics fundamentally. Imagine a future where loyalty is always conditional, where family members publicly hedge, where advisors prepare exit strategies as standard practice. You see, that's not just political instability. That's a transformation in how power operates. The line between necessary self-preservation and opportunistic abandonment becomes impossible to identify. Once that line blurs, it undermines not just individual leaders, but the concept of political leadership itself. You see, in finance, that's called systemic risk. In democracy, it's how institutions lose the ability to function effectively. If one political operation fractures this way and the behavior becomes a template, it invites others to follow the same path. What was once considered loyalty becomes redefined as liability exposure. What was once considered standing by your principles becomes reframed as failing to protect yourself. That shift in framing, once it takes hold culturally, changes everything. Every leader would then operate under the assumption that their closest allies are one crisis away from abandonment. That creates a permanent state of instability that's corrosive to effective governance. From where I sit, it's not just concerning for Trump, it's concerning for the system itself, because uncertainty of this magnitude always carries a cost. If this proceeds, the next steps will be extraordinarily consequential. Melania's statement, if released, will dominate news cycles for days, possibly weeks. The media attention will be intense, and every word will be analyzed for deeper meaning, legal implications, and political fallout. If senior advisors do begin departing publicly, each departure will be treated as confirmation of the internal collapse narrative. Trump's political opponents, both Democratic and Republican, will seize on these developments as evidence that Trump's operation is unsustainable. His supporters will likely frame it as betrayal or cowardice, but even among his base, the sight of family distance and advisor exodus will raise uncomfortable questions. The nation, already deeply divided, will interpret these events through entirely different lenses. Each side will see what it expects to see, and the broader public will be left trying to separate signal from noise. Public opinion won't transform immediately, especially not in this environment. But erosion can be gradual until it suddenly isn't. You see, we may be approaching one of those inflection points where accumulated pressure finally overcomes resistance and creates rapid change. As for whether this leads to Trump's political exit, that remains uncertain. Trump has proven remarkably resilient, surviving scandals and crises that conventional wisdom suggested were disqualifying. But he's never faced a crisis quite like this one, where the threat comes from inside and targets the foundation of his entire brand. The very fact that this conversation is happening at this level, with family involvement and senior advisor defection, tells us something critical. It's not just external pressure anymore, it's internal recognition that something fundamental has changed. Whether you follow politics daily or try to avoid it entirely, you see, structural changes like this affect everyone. They influence investor confidence, market stability, international perceptions of American political reliability, and the basic functioning of our democratic system. When leadership becomes this unstable, it creates ripple effects that touch every aspect of how our country operates. At its core, this is a test of political sustainability under maximum stress. You see, can a political operation built entirely on personal loyalty survive when that loyalty fractures? Not in theory, but in practice. Is Trump's brand of politics resilient enough to withstand internal defection? Or has it always been more fragile than it appeared, held together by perception rather than substance? You see, I've always believed that true strength is revealed under pressure, and sustainable systems are those built on more than just personality. We're about to find out whether Trump's political movement has that kind of foundation, or whether it was always dependent on the illusion of invincibility. This is not just a political crisis, it's a diagnostic moment. What happens next will echo far beyond one family and one political figure. You see, if internal collapse becomes the template for how political operations fragment under pressure, we're establishing patterns that will influence American politics for a generation. If loyalty becomes purely transactional and family members publicly hedge against political figures they're associated with, the nature of political leadership fundamentally changes. You see, you don't need to be a political scientist to understand how that affects governance, stability, and public trust. But if this moment demonstrates that there are still boundaries, that even figures as powerful as Trump face consequences when those boundaries are crossed, then perhaps the system still has self-correcting capacity. And in the long run, that's the kind of signal that restores faith in institutional resilience. When operations start showing this level of internal stress, it sends a message through the entire political ecosystem. You see, not just to current players, but to future ones who are watching and learning. If Melania's distancing becomes permanent and advisor exodus continues, it establishes a precedent that personal loyalty has limits even in the most tightly controlled political operations. You see, accountability in this context isn't just about legal consequences or political defeat. It's about whether the fundamental structure of American politics still rewards sustainable practices over purely transactional ones. If leaders can build empires on loyalty, but see those empires collapse the moment loyalty becomes inconvenient for followers, that's a powerful lesson. The landscape remains highly fluid. You see, you might see additional defections as people decide that early departure is safer than late departure. Documents related to internal discussions may surface, either through leaks or through legal processes. Timeline compression may continue, with events that would normally unfold over months happening in days. Even partisan loyalty has limits when personal interests are threatened, when career preservation and legal protection become paramount. You see, sometimes the cost of continued alignment outweighs everything else, including ideology. Whatever unfolds next, it will be studied for decades. You see, this is a case study about leadership, about the limits of personality-driven politics, and about how modern political operations respond to existential internal stress. These aren't just newsworthy developments. They're turning points that reveal fundamental truths about power, loyalty, and institutional durability. You see, we're not spectators in this story. We're all affected by it, whether we're managing investments, running businesses, or simply trying to understand the world our children will inherit. The stability of our political system creates the environment in which everything else operates. It's why this matters beyond partisan politics. That's why I'm watching so closely. The immediate path forward depends entirely on decisions being made. Right now, in private conversations, we're not privy to. You see, while Trump may still command significant political support, the fracturing of his inner circle represents a challenge unlike any he's faced. The allegations and concerns are no longer coming from expected opponents. They're emerging from the people who built his political brand and sustained it through every previous crisis. You see, this is not a partisan attack he can dismiss or an external investigation he can battle. It's an internal reckoning. The question is whether Trump's organizational structure and personal brand are robust enough to survive when the people closest to him decide that survival requires distance. You see, this situation is exploring every vulnerability in a personality-driven political model. It's a stress test not just of Trump, but of whether 21st century American politics can sustain movements built almost entirely on individual charisma rather than institutional depth. The markets have long understood that over-concentration in any single asset creates catastrophic risk when that asset underperforms. You see, similarly in politics, over-concentration of power and brand identity in a single individual creates fragility that may not be apparent until crisis hits. We're watching that fragility get tested in real time. The coming days and weeks will reveal whether the center holds or whether the fracture lines we're seeing now become complete breaks. Watch not only for public statements and formal announcements, but for the subtle signals. Who stops appearing at Trump events? Which advisors suddenly become unavailable for comment? Which donors quietly redirect their contributions? You see, these are the leading indicators of deeper structural change. The weight of this moment now rests on a relatively small group of people. You see, family members, senior advisors, legal counsel, and major donors who must decide whether their primary interest is served by continued association or strategic distance. Their choices, made under enormous pressure and with imperfect information, will shape not just Trump's future, but the template for how similar situations are handled going forward. You see, the cost of continued association must be weighed against the cost of being seen as disloyal or opportunistic. The cost of distance must be measured against the cost of potential legal, financial, or reputational harm from staying too close. These calculations are intensely personal, but their consequences are systemic. This is not about one man or one family, you see. It's about the sustainability of political models that concentrate everything in personality rather than distributing it across institutions. It's about whether American politics has mechanisms that can manage the collapse of such models without creating broader instability. In investing, I've always said the most important quality is not intelligence, but temperament. The ability to maintain rational judgment under emotional pressure. You see, the same is true for political systems. Do we have the collective temperament to manage this kind of internal political collapse without it metastasizing into something that damages the broader system? That's the test we're all facing together. Listen, I've lived through tremendous political upheaval in my 94 years. You see, I've seen leaders rise and fall, movements surge and collapse, and institutions bend under pressure that seemed certain to break them. This moment feels significant because it's testing something we haven't tested before in quite this way. Not external opposition to a political figure, but internal abandonment by those who built and sustained that figure's power. You see, what we do now, what those close to Trump do now, what the media does, what voters do, will define not just this moment, but how future moments like it are navigated. That's a heavy responsibility, but it's also unavoidable. The institutions and norms we inherit aren't ours to break. You see, they're ours to protect, stress test, and pass on. And if we fail that duty because we're too caught up in partisan loyalty or political point scoring to recognize systemic risk when we see it, well, the cost won't be limited to one political career. It'll be measured in decades of institutional degradation, so pay close attention. Demand accountability from leaders across the political spectrum, and remember that in any system, silence and inaction are choices, you see, and sometimes the most expensive choices of all. Before we close, if this analysis helped you understand what's really at stake beyond the partisan noise, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this content. And if you want to continue receiving this kind of measured, serious analysis about the forces shaping our political and economic future, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. You see, understanding these patterns isn't about choosing political sides. It's about reading the signals that affect all of us, regardless of ideology. Thank you for your time and your attention to these critical issues.